I'm joined on the line by Paul McNally from the Wits Radio Academy. Each week they look at the science behind a major news event in the Science Inside. And this week was particularly interesting, especially because the entire year, the entire country has been focused on Oscar Pistorius, and now that he's in prison, Paul McNally and his team looked at the science inside prisons in South Africa. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, as we heard in Oscar Pistorius' defense, a lot of evidence was led indicating that South African prisons are just unsuitable places for Pistorius. They're overcrowded, the healthcare facilities aren't that great, and you looked into a fascinating way to fix that.
Yeah, and mainly through design. We had an architect, Paul Silver, who speaks with a wonderful New York accent throughout of it. And he explained that security, I think the key sort of idea is that security is not about more guns, it's not about any of those things, it's about better design. And through that, you don't just improve your security, you can also improve the conditions, the level of violence, and also the rate of escape. So through all these things, just by good architecture, and not even more money, you can really help people's conditions and experience of prison inside.
I suppose as South Africans, when we're faced with a problem like this, we just want to throw more manpower, more weapons, higher fences at the problem. But it's fascinating that he disagreed completely and said that it's all about how you build your prisons. So why exactly is this not happening? I mean, he's an expert in the field, he lives in Johannesburg. Why aren't we using him?
Well, yeah, that's the sad part of the story. I mean, he lives now in Johannesburg, Silver, and he's got an incredible reputation of developing prisons in America, like high security prisons, TB facilities in prisons. And yet, even though he's been asked, and actually was asked by when Nelson Mandela was still president, to revamp the prison system, every time he tries it, his efforts sort of get convoluted. He's designed certain prisons that then, after they've taken his design, they've just added more security. They don't trust the fact that people won't be able to escape a certain thing. They'll add more concrete, less visibility. Because the key to it is the idea that your guards have to be able to have good line of sight. That's how you lower people misbehaving. So by putting more walls in between the guards and the prisoners, you actually open up the idea that more sort of nefarious instances can happen. And just that lowers the rate of violence considerably, like huge. Why he's not being utilized, yeah, I'm sure he has many theories about that range from good to conspiracy theory-like. But yeah, it's a great shame as well.
In fact, his success rate is incredible, and one of the stories that he mentions is that in a particular prison that he designed, he has female wardens looking over men who are being incarcerated. And that isn't a comment that women aren't able to be prison wardens, but rather it's just unheard of, especially in South Africa, because of the real risks involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing how I think it's, and we touch on that in other parts of the show, just the idea that people react and will become bad based on their environment. And I think a lot of it has to do with how you treat people, how you expect people to act, then they will act like that, And I think you can really change people's behavior, even if they are the most hardened criminals, just by addressing them in a different way and putting them in a different kind of environment.
Of course, when it came to Oscar Pistorius' trial, everybody was very concerned about the medical treatment that he was going to receive. But this prison architect says that actually the best way to curb things like tuberculosis in prison is by design. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's endless concerns with TB in jail in South Africa, mainly because we have one of the highest rates in the world of the general population, but then also in prison, it's almost like an incubator, as Silver sort of describes it. Like, this is the worst place. If you wanted to breed a super strain of TB, prison is a good place to do it. And really, by designing, you don't just open windows, you don't just allow air to move in that way. You design a facility. Basically, the way he puts it is you're designing a medical facility with security measures. You're not doing it the other way around. And by approaching it like that, you can really lower your TB problem. And then, of course, I mean, even if you're the most right-wing kind of person, and you're like, prisoners don't deserve that, as I'm sure every common sort of string tends to have, you should look at it the fact that you don't want people in prison to get sick, because they are going to be released, and they're released into the population, and they can spread TB like that. So it's in everyone's interest to protect and to reduce disease for inmates.
Well, just listening to your interview with him, I really hope that somewhere, somehow, sometime his skills are put to use in this country, because we certainly need him.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Now, another fascinating part of this week's show was looking into the psychology of inmates. You started off by explaining how even relatively good people in a prison environment tend to change their personalities almost.
Yeah, this is the Stanford experiment, which was done years ago in 1971 by a psychologist called Philip Zimbardo. And essentially, they constructed a highly unethical experiment where they took volunteers, and they knew what they were getting into, but they took 24 men and assigned 12 of them to be guards and 12 of them to be inmates, and then sort of made them role play. And it was as simple and as complicated as that. But what they found after just a few days is that the guards took control of their role to such an extent that they were actually trying to, in every possible way, trying to exert control and power over what were basically, they knew were innocent people. They knew everyone was involved in sort of a game, and it was amazing. By just putting them in a prison environment, everyone sort of shifted to the roles that they were expected to do. And basically were doing horrific things. They were making the pretend prisoners scoop out toilet bowls with their hands. It was genuinely humiliating. And now years later, they've interviewed them, and they said, yeah, we don't know why we did that. It was just, it felt right at the time. And it's amazing how, again, the environment can just cause people to change so radically, to the point where often you'll, like, if you come out of a terrible experience or a terrible environment, you'll be like, I have no idea why I did that. And that's part of that experiment.
You also spoke about the psychology of solitary confinement. And that was fascinating, because I suppose being locked away from the world sounds wonderful for a lot of us who have to work every day. But like you describe in this piece, it's not as great as we may think it is.
No, it's not. I mean, and also, there are instances of solitary where a lot of, because it's done in America a lot, like in high security prisons, people are put into solitary, and people are often, the prisoners often scoff at the idea, like, this is not a punishment, this is ridiculous, like, I'm going to be able to walk through this. And the most interesting part is what happens after not so long is your mind starts to just go blank. You can't think. So without that social contact, and the way people describe it is like, I had no thoughts. Everything I'd ever learned had somehow vanished. And it's almost like a terrifying experience. And Ian Mayer, who we speak to in the show, puts it very well, in that we are social animals. We need this more than you appreciate. Often you need space alone to read and to relax, but at the same time, like, the lifeblood of how you are as a human is to be with other humans. And that's why it's such a bad punishment.
I suppose it's also important to note on this point that we're not speaking about solitary confinement where somebody is starved and beaten. It's simply just putting a human being away from any type of stimulus or person for a period of time.
Yeah. And also, the interesting part is people where, the beating, or that kind of social interaction, they often have instances where if someone is in bad solitary, they will actually misbehave in order to evoke a guard to come in. And then even that social contact, even if it's going to end with a beating, is seen as preferable to just being on your own. I mean, that's an incredible extent of suffering. If you are really at a point where you're willing to be beaten just to have social human interaction, that kind of isolation is just terrible.
Well, as the MPA have announced that they're going to appeal Oscar Pistorius' sentence and conviction, I highly suggest you listen to this episode of The Science Inside. You can find the full episode below, and as always, we'll be catching up with Paul McNally next week. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thanks very much.